Who wants a pot of coffee? I just made coffee. You want a cup of coffee? Sure, there you go. Who wants coffee? Anybody else want coffee? Who wants coffee?
And now it's time for the man with the caffeine, the new tropics for the brain. It's Coffee with Mike. Hang in, hang tight, grab your cup, and let's get this thing started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Java Chat. This is Coffee with Mike, and today I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing a gentleman that's going to share with us a story about a literal change in TV broadcasting that most of us have no freaking clue about. All I know is that I used to, when HBO was around, they started coming out with extra channels and all these other networks, and one in particular I used to love watching, which was called Comedy Central. Well, the gentleman I get to interview today is the man that came up with the brainchild of Comedy Central, and that is Art Bell. Art, thanks for joining us here on Java Chat.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's cool. Quite a story you must have. I mean, how did you even get into broadcasting?
Well, I aimed for it, actually.
Cool.
I wanted to be in the television business. And when I came out of school, I thought I really wanted to work, close to programming and everything else, but I did not have any experience. So I ended up going to work for CBS, which was in those days,
They were the behemoth.
Gigantic.
Yeah, they were
it was huge.
Yeah.
And it was also like kind of the post office of broadcasting because it had, had so many layers of management and everything. I was nowhere near the product. You know what I mean? I was
the epitome of the corporate structure, boy.
Yeah, it was.
It really was.
And partly as a victim of the success of broadcasting. There were three broadcasters in those days, ABC, NBC, and CBS. Yep. They were gigantic. They were like, whoever came in first made $1 zillion, and whoever came in third made $1 zillion minus $1. And that was,
that was pretty much it. Yeah,
that was pretty much it year after year. And they just had, lots of staff and lots of people like me working for, doing crazy things that weren't very important, I thought, but there I was.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you get locked into the corporate structure. You always wonder whether or not what you're doing is worth anything. But you aimed, and where did you end up when you first got into CBS? Where were you?
I was in the television stations division, which I have to say, of all the places I could have gone, that was a good one. In that, at least I was around television stations once in a while. And in those days, television stations really had a strong news presence.
Yes, they did.
Local news presence. That's where people got their local news, local television, local radio. So I got a good look at that, if nothing else. But mostly I was just cranking out financial reports.
Oh, geez. You were counting beans for him.
It's, look, when you have to get into the business, you get into the business,
Yeah.
You don't get to check off the job you want.
That's a deep dive into a business. Let me tell you, when you're looking at numbers all day, that becomes
you know what? Let me just say, for people listening out there who say, "Oh my gosh, I would never do that." You got to remember, it was a job. There were other people around, young people. We got to be friends. We had some laughs. Got me my next job. Learned how to work in a huge corporate structure. Should I ever need that again? I mean, let's not really denigrate it too much. And corporations, it's a fact of business. So knowing how to operate within a corporation is worth a lot.
Well, I'm sure the background too, once you get into that, you have one of the biggest staples that you need in your background, even as an entrepreneur. You got to be able to understand your numbers. I mean, if you can't read a simple P&L or something like that, you're doomed somewhere down the line. So, and I got a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this. So it doesn't matter if you have worked in a corporate structure, there's always bits and pieces of it that you're going to need as an entrepreneur somewhere down the line. There's value in it. So yeah, I get that. I mean, it's totally. When you went from there to TV stations, when did you start getting into the actual, like, more directly involved with the broadcasting side, or is that already involved in the broadcasting side?
Well, that's broadcasting.
Okay.
I mean, and let me, you're
Again,
right.
I'm clueless. This is why I'm asking. This is just I
Yeah,
don't know.
no. It's good that you're clueless. So that we can talk it through with
Yeah.
you and everybody else listening.
Yeah.
Broadcasting is, what goes out over the air.
Hmm.
And what happened years ago is that cable came along.
Yeah.
And what cable was originally was a way to get broadcast signals, which may have been weak in certain areas, from a big gigantic antenna on a hill nearby into people's homes.
Right.
And then once they did that, then cable channels started showing up, HBO among them. HBO started in the 70s.
Yeah.
People may not realize that, and went up on the satellite in 1976. Now that was a big innovation in cable.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, because before that, it was rare for a channel for anybody to be up on a satellite. Satellite time was expensive. But the people at HBO had this idea. They said, look, we got programming here. If we put it up on the satellite, then downlink it to the cable operator. Instead of him taking a broadcast signal, he'll take a cable, a satellite signal.
Yeah.
And he could distribute that to his customers. Cable was born. So,
That's
so
crazy.
I went from broadcasting to cable, essentially.
Okay.
And the way I did that is I had a friend who I'd been working with at CBS, and I was only there for a year and a half or so.
Uh-huh.
But he got picked off by HBO. He got a job at HBO. Now, this is the early to mid 80s. And he called me up after a few months. He said, man, it's just like, it's crazy fun here. I mean, it's really, first of all, these guys are so successful. They've got lots of money, lots of resources. Secondly, they're walking around the hall saying they're going to change television forever. I mean, that was their mandate. I mean, HBO is kind of what Netflix is now, it's just like new and shiny, and how are we going to, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
And he said, and the really good news is they're looking for somebody who can do subscriber forecasting for them. They want to know how many subscribers they're going to have. And didn't you work as an economist before you got into television? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, you're probably the only guy I know who can do forecasting modeling. Why don't you come interview for the job? So I did. And that's how I got a job at HBO.
Talk about the new kid on the block trying to go up against the big 800-pound gorillas. There were 3 of them that HBO had to deal with out the gate. How did that go?
Well, by the time I got there, you got to remember the innovation that was HBO was uncut movies.
Yeah.
Delivered directly to your home.
No commercials.
No commercials.
That was the best
and
part
no
about
censorship.
Yep.
They weren't cutting out the language or the sex violence, whatever it was. Stuff that was being shown on broadcast up until then had been, cut movies. I mean, they had not only commercials, but they had to sanitize them for broadcast.
Yeah.
So that was why television, HBO television sold a lot.
Oh,
and
sure.
they got into a lot of homes. They're still in a lot of homes.
Yeah.
And they made a lot of money.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So once you got in and you started doing the forecasting, where did you see this new opportunity, or was it just kind of bubbling under the surface, waiting to be discovered? How did that go?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I thought about a comedy network as early as business school.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why. When I got to business school, I was looking for people like me who were interested in the entertainment business, figuring maybe there's a club or something,
Yeah.
They directed me to the Wharton Follies. I was at Wharton Graduate School, the Wharton Follies. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, the graduate students put on a musical comedy satirical review once a year. I said, well, that sounds good. So I went down and I checked in with them, and it was really quite a group. I mean, these were a lot of people from entertainment who were trying to get out of entertainment and go into investment banking and consulting. So we had, the director had been a Broadway director. The choreographer had worked on Broadway. I mean, these were people who were really...
They were there. They'd done that.
They were there. And there were a lot of kids from that Harvard who had been in the Harvard Hasty Pudding show and all that. So these people were, they weren't pikers. I mean, this was a real item.
Yeah.
The second year I did it, I was in it the first year. Second year I did it, I wrote it. I wrote the whole thing. And I had always liked writing comedy, and I wrote the whole thing. It was very funny. And it reminded me how much fun comedy is. And so when I came out of business school, I said, hey, why no comedy network? You know, you got an all news channel out there, you got an all music channel, you got an all sports channel. What happened to the all comedy channel? And I figured somebody would start one eventually, but when I got my first job, there wasn't one. So I went to CBS.
When Comedy Central started, if I remember correctly, well, before it was Comedy Central, it had a different name, I think, because there was
You're right.
somebody else started a comedy network at the same time that that HBO did, didn't they? I can't remember who it was.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the story because it is a little confusing.
Let's start from the beginning.
I'll give you the straight story. I pitched the comedy concept to HBO when I was there, and we can go through how that happened and what happened.
Yeah, in the next section we'll do that.
That was launched as the Comedy Channel.
Yes, that's right. Okay,
so that was the very first comedy network in the world, and until then there wasn't one. 6 months later, a second comedy network launched, and that was called the Comedy Network.
Oh, I remember
that was launched by MTV Networks. As completely as a competitor to what we were doing.
Just to be honest, I never watched that one. I watched it like once or twice that I can remember, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm going back to Comedy Channel."
You know what? Thank you for saying that.
No, because I honestly think that you're correct. I think they started it just to start shit, and I don't think they did a good job on it. Honestly, I love watching comedy.
Listen. One thing that you learn in business, and this is a message to everybody out there who's an entrepreneur or anything else, never underestimate the competition.
True.
They are going to show up. We made an announcement that we were doing a comedy channel called the Comedy Channel. And we had been working on it for 6 or 8 months before we made the big announcement.
Sure.
A day after we announced, and I am talking the next day, MTV Networks put out a press release. We are doing a comedy network as well. We're calling it Now, how far do you think they'd gotten on their on their comedy concept at that point? They had a press release, but good for them, good for them, because they weren't going to take it lying down that HBO was going to take
run up. Yeah, they're going to take a cut of the viewers. Yeah, definitely.
So they started it 6 months after we launched. They launched, as I said. And we went head to head, boom. And I had to laugh. I had to say, as much as I had my hands full with launching a comedy network, when the comedy competition showed up, I said, oh man, you're kidding me. But I did have to laugh and say, hey, 6 months ago, there weren't any comedy networks. Suddenly there's going to be 2 comedy networks.
Yeah, exactly.
That must validate the whole concept, right?
Yeah.
I can't be completely out of my mind.
No, I would say that screams validation, because at that point it's like, and I agree. I mean, who doesn't want to laugh? I mean, who doesn't want to have a good chuckle here and there? Why wouldn't you want to be able to turn on something that you can look at and just watch it? Back in those days, all we had was TV. Of course, now we can watch it on our phones and stuff. But the point back then was, the only people that had any kind of humor that you could watch were the late night, like Johnny Carson and all those guys. That was about it. And that was it. Here, now you have the opportunity of 24/7. You feel like getting a laugh, turn on Comedy Channel, turn on Comedy Central. If I remember correctly, eventually the two merged, didn't they?
The Comedy Channel merged with at the end. It was a year after we launched and 6 months after they launched.
What was the story behind that one? Because, I mean, obviously something happened that MTV was just kind of like, or they realized that this would be a great idea. Let's do that. How did that play out?
Well, as I said, we were going head to head. We were fighting as using everything in our power to try and make sure that the Comedy Channel survived and that the channel, which we didn't care about, died. That was
that's
our
how it goes.
plan.
That's how it goes.
Let's put them out of business. Let's be better with them.
Yep.
And by the end of the year, we had more audience. We had a better concept. I thought we had so much going for us. And I got a phone call saying we're going to merge the channels. And I thought, what? wait a second, we are winning.
Yeah,
We are
right.
so far out ahead. The press said it. The ratings are better. Everything's going great. They got nothing,
Yeah.
and we're merging. And I'll tell you, I found out the story subsequently. The story is that the cable operators who had to launch the channel individually on all their cable systems,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Manhattan Cable, Los Angeles Cable,
Right.
Chicago
Okay.
Cable. There were individual cable systems. They didn't want two comedy networks. I mean, they didn't want to have to make a decision, and they sure as heck didn't want to launch two.
Yeah.
So there was pressure put on HBO and MTV networks to merge the channels, and just like, come on, stop already,
Oh my
because the
gosh.
comedy wars are making us crazy, the cable operator said. And there was one very powerful cable operator who owned, I would say, 25% of the cable systems in America. And he said, look, knock it off, merge them. And so
Wow.
my boss, who's the chairman of HBO, Michael Fuchs, very
Yeah.
powerful
Yep.
man in
I
the
remember
industry.
that name.
And Frank Biondi, who is a very powerful man, who is the head of Viacom.
Remember that name too.
They had been co-chairman of HBO. So they were friends. They knew each other.
So it wasn't a big deal. It was an easy
So it was
decision.
a phone call.
Yeah.
You know, it was a phone call. I heard actually, and I put this in my book, because I wrote a book about the whole thing.
Sure.
Called Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central
Yeah.
and Lost My Sense of Humor. It's a memoir. Anyway, I put the story in my book. And the rumor was that they played tennis together every week,
Oh,
because they were still friends. And over the tennis net, they did a deal saying, look, we're going to make each other crazy.
Yeah, it's not unusual. I've heard of stuff like that happening out on golf courses, racquetball courts, and you just, hey, why don't we just do this and just not, let's just do that. It's probably better, probably easier.
A lot of business gets done that way.
Yeah, it does. Cool. And so today, you're now a published author. And what are you doing now besides being an author? Are you just hanging out, chilling? What do you do?
Man, if you call this chilling, let me tell you something. When you launch a book, and this is my first book, I've been writing for about, I guess, 4 or 5 years. When you launch a book, you spend a lot of time, not only promoting the book, but just sort of having fun with the book. I mean, for me, I wrote a memoir.
Mhm.
It's about a specific time, and there were a lot of people involved. And half the fun has been just talking to all the people who call me up. Hey, I read the book. It's great. Wow, wasn't that great? And talking to the press and, talking to other people who were very interested in the time, and really just getting the word out. I'm glad I wrote the book because it's the 30th anniversary, by the way, of Comedy Central.
Really?
April 1st. Yeah.
Let me write that down.
You're going to have to write that down. Yeah.
April 1st is when Comedy Central launched. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Holy cow.
April 1st. And that was the merged channel. That's when we relaunched as the merged channel, which is a crazy story in itself. So that, listen, we are, I am very interested in kind of keeping the original flame alive just because it was so much fun. It was such a creative time, even though it was so difficult to launch. And it was difficult in many ways. So listen, entrepreneurs are always up against the constant possibility of failure. It's nothing, including Comedy Central, is shot out of a cannon, fully realized, completely successful, exactly the way the person who, in this case, me, pictured it and pitched it.
Yep.
It's improvisational.
Yeah.
I used to say that this is improvisational comedy, man. We got to figure out what we're doing every day to make things better.
That's really inside. That's really cool that you said that, because as entrepreneurs, we're constantly telling each other, you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Just you do your best that you can today, planning for tomorrow, and then figuring it out as it comes, because you never know. Sales could go through the roof tomorrow. Sales could take a complete dive tomorrow, or it could be the same. Are you ready for it? I think that has a lot to do with what you just said. We're going to take a short 30-second break, you guys. When we come back, I want to dig in a little bit to some of those stories, in the memoirs, because I have a feeling there's some really cool stuff to learn from Art here in a minute. So we'll be back in 30 seconds. And we're back here, Java Chat, sitting here with Art Bell, talking about his time at HBO. And when we left off, we were talking about he just picked up a job forecasting at HBO. and he's been thinking about this comedy channel thing. Sorry, Comedy Central comes later. This comedy channel thing for a while, since like business school. Back in those days, if you wanted to bring an idea like that, you had to do this thing called a pitch. Now, for those of you that are entrepreneurs, you know pitch as going and finding money. Slightly different story in broadcast, same premise, but I don't know if the story is going to be the same. So I want to hear how this lays out, Art. How did you do it?
Well, the good news, I thought at the time, was I was at HBO, which was, an innovator in the television business.
Absolutely.
And I thought, okay, so they're probably up for some innovation. And I started talking it up and thinking about it and writing it up for myself and everything else. And then one day I thought, you know what? I'm just what do I have to lose? I'm young and stupid. I am going to go and I am going to try and make an appointment with the head of programming at HBO.
Boy,
now, that was a pretty gutsy move on my part.
Yes, it is.
Her name was Bridget. She was considered some kind of a genius, as many programmers were in those days.
Yeah.
And maybe to a certain extent still are. Golden gut, they know what to put on. They know what to produce. I mean, she was a formidable person.
Yeah.
But she said, okay, she'd see me. And I went into her office and I said, Bridget, I think HBO should start an all comedy network. And she said, stop right there. That is the worst idea I've ever heard.
Damn.
Yeah. And she said, let me tell you why. First of all, nobody wants to watch 24 hours of comedy. That's crazy. Second of all, there's lots of comedy on TV already. Third, you're not going to get any good comedians on that channel. What, you think Robin Williams is going to be on an all comedy channel? No. And finally, I just would like to mention that why would HBO risk its reputation on starting a new channel? We're doing great. And we have comedy. And she said, thanks for coming in. There's the door. Take care of yourself. And I walked out and, that was like a big truckload of cold water thrown on me and my concept.
That was more like a 5-inch gun blown in your face, dude. She took no prisoner on that shot. My gosh, that was just one good here. Have this. Boom.
Yeah. But I will say, I walked down the hall away. As I was walking away from her office, I thought, you know what? She's wrong. Okay, she thinks it's a bad idea, but it's not a bad idea. And somebody will start a network that's all comedy. And why shouldn't it be me? So I went back to my office and I really put some effort into writing it up, getting the financials together, thinking a lot about how the programming would work, how to launch it inexpensively.
Boy, that forecasting must have come in really handy at that point.
That's it. I mean, I had a financial background.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, I had also, I considered myself creative in that I'd done a lot of theater in school. I'd done a lot of writing by then. I really thought of myself as someone who was multidisciplinary. Although I had no experience.
You had both left and right brain rolling at the same time. That's perfect, dude. Are you kidding? That's you can bring a concept to life very well if you're able to back it up with the science. The creative is beautiful, but you got to have that other backing too. And you had them both. I can see a perfect storm coming here. Keep going.
But I had lots of cred on the finance and economic side. I'd had a job for 3 years in economics in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
And I was good at it. I was smart. On the creative side, zip. I mean, I felt it inside me and I felt I could do it, but I wasn't in programming. I had never produced anything. I'd never produced a show. I'd never even been on the radio at that point, So it was hard to be taken seriously. That said, I put everything together and it was, as crazy as it seems, I thought, okay, I'll either do it myself by raising money. Hello to all the entrepreneurs out there. Or I'll take it to Viacom or to CBS or to some other big company who may be interested, and I'll staple it to my resume and get a job over there. And see what happens. As I was doing that, as luck would have it, my boss's boss happened by and asked me, what are you doing? It's late. You're not supposed to be working right now. What's going on? And I said, well, I'm working on this thing, And he said, let me see. And he took a look at it. And he said, this is great. He said, this is really interesting. An all comedy network. I like that. He says, I bet Michael Fuchs, the chairman of HBO, would like to hear about this. So I said, okay. And he said, let's go. And I said, what, right now? And he said, yeah, let's go.
That's how that happens usually.
And I said, okay. And we walked down the hall, got in the elevator, and went to his office. And let me just tell you something. Michael Fuchs at that moment had been declared by the New York Times Magazine in a cover story, the most powerful man in Hollywood. So there's me, who had just recently been blown to smithereens by Bridget, who worked for Michael, walking into Michael's office to pitch exactly the same idea. So I did, and I pitched my little heart out. And I think what got me through that was my passion for the idea, because I love comedy.
Sure.
And the fact that I had thought it through. And also, and I like to mention this, the vision. I think what I sold Michael on was when I said a couple of things. One was, in 10 years, Michael, if this thing works, we are going to be the center of the comedy universe. Yep. And that was kind of a North Star for us. I mean, we called it lots of different things, but that was essentially what I said we wanted to be. And I said also, and this is a good note for anybody out there. I said, somebody else is going to do it. Might as well be us. You want somebody else walking off with that gigantic comedy audience? I said, right now we are comedy on television. Yeah. We have those 1 hour specials. We have young comedian specials. Yep. You can't see Robin Williams act uncut anywhere in the world except the club or HBO. Yep. That's it.
Yep. That's true.
And I think Michael loved comedy. And I think that he said, okay, let's give it a try. Now, he didn't say, let's launch it tomorrow. He said, okay, let's do some more research. Let's do a demo tape. Let's get our ducks in a row. He was very careful because, of course, he had a business to run and he had bosses.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were owned by Time Inc. at the time. So we had to, he was going to have to make a case for the thing too, to spend more money on.
Right.
Anyway, so that's what happened. And that was how we got started. And I ended up giving a big presentation to about 30 executives at HBO a couple months later. And Michael said, I love it. I want it launched in 6 months. And I said, oh my gosh, 6 months? Are you kidding me? I didn't say that. I said, oh, okay, great. But that was really having a tiger by the tail, especially since, as you know, at this point, I had really no experience in programming and comedy. I didn't know the comedy business. I didn't know whether this whole concept was going to work. And suddenly this whole thing is sitting on my shoulders. And I'll tell you, it was a moment of excitement and terror at the same time. and the real challenge at that moment was to try to keep the terror from, overwhelming the excitement, and also from trying to look scared, keep from looking scared.
Right.
It was scary. So there I was. And they teamed me up with a guy named Stu Smiley, who was the head of comedy at HBO. He was a programmer who had been in the comedy business for 10 years at that point.
So you had somebody with experience at least to help guide.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what the first thing he said to me?
What
the hell do you know about comedy? And he said that probably 100 times in the first 2 weeks we were working together.
Oh,
and he was right. I didn't know anything about comedy other than I liked it.
Yeah.
So that was the start of a crazy partnership.
How did that? I'm going to go dig on this because partnerships like that usually end up being very interesting, and at many times, very beneficial. Just because of the fact that there's one who has a vision and drive and one who has experience. How did that work between the two of you?
Well,
after the first 2 weeks of shock and figuring out that you had to work together.
Look, I wasn't Stu's boss and he wasn't my boss. We were co-equals. We were reporting to Michael, essentially, Michael Fuchs. And Stu had no choice in the matter. He was going to have to help put together a comedy network, whether he liked it or not. Now, from his point of view, honestly, he thought it was a great idea. He and I disagreed on the best way to go about it. I will say that.
Yeah.
And I, again, I was the business guy. I was a suit at that point. That's what they called us. And Stu was the entertainment guy. So his job was to kind of put some talent together, comedians, people who would be working in and around the channel, writers. And my job was to do basically everything else, like figure out what the channel was going to look like, marketing, branding. I was in charge of a large part of the programming, everything that Stu wasn't doing, which was movies and series. And
Jeez, you had the
did
startup.
short form programming.
You had the pure startup. That was it.
Yeah. And there was a word for it that had just kind of come about in those days, and it was called intrapreneurship. That's when you're starting a company inside another company. And
Yep.
it's a big deal today. I mean, there's an Intrapreneur Institute in Denver, Colorado. They found me after I wrote the book because they were very interested.
That's cool.
But it's like entrepreneurship, but there are real differences. And we can talk about that if you want. But Stu and I, as a partnership, it was, we got it done. I will say that. But there were times where we were really kind of going at it, really disagreeing with each other, especially when things weren't going very well, which is most of the time. I gotta say.
Was that during the 6 months leading up to launch, or was that during?
Yeah, well, it was during the 6 months leading up to launch, because everybody was kind of like working crazy 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, just trying to get this thing together. And remember, we weren't there saying, okay, let's just copy that other comedy channel over there and do it a little bit better. This was comedy channel number one. We were doing this from scratch. Nobody had an idea of what this really would be or should be or could be or would look like or how would it work. And that's on the programming and creative side and everything. On the other side, we had to make a business out of it. We had to sell advertising. We had to get, distribution so that people could watch it. Believe me, there was a lot to do.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean,
there was a lot to do. And so the pressure was very intense.
I'm sure.
To get to launch. Then we launched. And, years later, somebody said to me, after there were about 20 channels in those days,
right.
But, ultimately got to be 500 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
So there were all kinds of people launching channels, and they would talk to me, and somebody was about to launch a channel or had launched a channel and said, and the observation was, you're never as good. You never look as good as a channel as you do the day before your launch, because on the day you're launched, everybody can see exactly what you are. There's no more bullshitting about it. There's no more saying it's going to be great. There's no more saying it's going to be this, that, and the other thing. There you are. And that's exactly what happened in comedy. Michael Fuchs had gone out there, very proud of the concept. We're HBO. We know how to make programming. We know how to do comedy. This is going to be the funniest channel ever. And I'm like,
tone it down, Mikey. Tone it down.
We don't know where this is going to end up. Maybe we should do a little soft launch,
Yeah.
But no, that's not Michael. And that's not the entertainment business. That's not show business, So he put himself way out there, And when it didn't go well, even leading up to the launch, I got to say, we were sweating bullets. And then when we launched, the press creamed us. And they creamed us partly because Michael put himself out there. And again, when somebody says, okay, you're the most powerful man in Hollywood, and the press has a chance to say, hey, look what the most powerful guy in Hollywood just screwed up royally. Let's take a look at that.
They love doing that.
They had so much fun at our expense. And that was very hard, which is why the subtitle of my book is How I Launched Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor, because every day I went to work thinking they were going to pull the plug. Every day.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
That's how hard it was. And that's what I wanted to convey. And that's what I wanted to write about in this book, is how incredibly, crushingly difficult it can be.
I don't think anybody realizes some of the entrepreneurs do, I'm sure, but I don't think everybody realizes just exactly how much work goes into actually launching a channel. You mentioned 6 months, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But that wasn't a joke back in those days. I mean, that was truth. I hear some entrepreneurs these days are like, well, I try to set my boundaries and I'm like, bruh, if you were any time back in the 70s, you would know what it means to really struggle to open up a business, especially one that happens to sit inside a major network like that, because it's not a joke when somebody says 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You have no life, but you have a vision and a passion to drive something. And like you said, day of launch, You might have been saying it's a beautiful unicorn, and all of a sudden they show up and it's a pig with lipstick. It doesn't bode well. But it was an easy recovery over time. I mean, you said 10 years. It didn't take 10 years.
No, it didn't take 10 years. We started to get an audience pretty quickly, even though
Yeah.
the press was merciless.
That's usually why
And
people show up, because they want to see if it's true.
well, they want to see if it's true. And not only that, but we had a couple of things going for us. One, Mystery Science Theater 3000
Oh my gosh.
had shown up at our door completely unexpectedly before we launched. It's a funny story.
Huh.
Our head writer, we had a head writer at the
Uh-huh.
channel, which is amazing to think about. And his name was Eddie Gordetsky. He's still a writer today. He's a very funny guy. And he said, hey, he talked like that. Hey, we need a show that's where comedians watch movies or television and make jokes. And we said, yeah, that sounds good, Eddie. So everybody started working on that show. And about a week later, in the mail, a package came. And it had a letter in it, and it was from the guys who did Mystery Science Theater 3000. And they said, hey, we've been doing this at a station in Minneapolis. We hear you're launching a comedy channel. Is this something you'd be interested in?
Holy cow.
We throw the cassette into the player, and we were blown away, hysterical. And there it was. I mean, that's the show that Eddie was talking about.
Uh-huh.
And it's been done a million times in a million ways since then. But these guys nailed it. So we got on a plane. I got on a plane the next day, went to Minneapolis, inked the deal.
Nice.
And the rest is history. So, in terms of some of the things that kept me going, that was one of the things that kept me going, because even before we launched, an innovative comedy programming found us. There we were. We were a magnet for this stuff. And
Was that the first deal?
I wouldn't say it was the first deal, but it was the first time we were looking at a piece of programming that would have never been on NBC, CBS, or ABC, or HBO.
Yeah.
I mean, it just would not have seen the light of day
Sure.
had it not been for the existence of a comedy channel. And I thought, okay, come hell or high water, eventually this thing is going to be successful, because
Sure.
innovative comedy is going to find us, and people will come to appreciate that. So anyway, I started to say, so that happened, and that kind of anchored us for the first few months and kind of got a lot of attention in a good way.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we would go out and talk to advertisers, and the advertiser would say, you know what, we looked at the channel. We don't think it's any good for for us, but I got to say, my 17-year-old kid is watching this thing and thinks it's great. And I don't know what he's talking about, but there it is. And so at that point, I started to say, wait a second, we're getting an audience here. We're getting some fans. We're getting people writing to us. So it was a very slow build. But remember, I'm going to work every day saying, what? How am I going to make this thing better?
Yep.
What am I going to do more of that's working? What am I going to do less of that's not working? And that's the game. It's a channel. It's not a movie where you make it, you put it out on Wednesday. By the following Monday, it either made money or it didn't.
Or didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't change it. This, you make adjustments every day. And that's what we did. We turned up the stand-up comedy dial. We put more stand-up on than we had originally intended.
Mm-hmm.
And we got some other programming. We just kept, as I said, comedy improvisation. That's what it was. How are we going to get our footing?
There's a bunch of improvisational groups, if you will. Second City being one of the most successful. Do you akin that to like what you guys had to deal with as far as improvising? I mean, literally coming in on a daily basis and just like, oh, here's Tuesday. What do we do today? Kind of thing. I mean, is that kind of what you're saying that you had to deal with?
Well, not only that, here's Monday night at 3 a.m. What are we going to do?
Oh, it gets that bad. Okay.
Waking, staring at the ceiling. Well, let's talk about improvisation a little bit.
Yeah.
Because improvisation is underrated as a business tool.
Hugely. Go. Yeah, hugely. Yeah. I would agree.
And I when I first came to New York, one of the things I did is I took a comedy improvisation class
Uh-huh.
at one of the comedy improv groups in New York, and there were several. And Chicago City Limits, it was called. I just remember Chicago
cool.
City Limits.
Okay.
And that class, I was kind of a funny guy, but that class taught me all about improvisation, how you have to think fast on your feet, how you can't say no or I don't know,
Yeah.
how you have to really respond to whatever's going on around you and work with whatever's going on around you to, in that case, put on a show. But in real life, it comes, and it's certainly in business, you're up against the same thing. You're giving a presentation. Somebody's asking questions. You're, you're on the spot. You're improvising. Okay. You don't know what's going to happen. And in fact, improvisational comedy groups have been teamed up with business quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I just heard there's a guy who wrote, there's a guy at the University of Denver who wrote a book called Business Shtick.
Nice.
And I was talking to him, and I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he was telling me that that SCTV had just teamed up with the University of Chicago
Really?
to business school, and this is this has got to be 6 weeks ago, to work together to mine this area, this understanding, of how improvisation and improvisational comedy can help executives be better executives, can help business people be better business people. And one more example, my younger brother, who has been in improvisational comedy most of his life, he also works in IT, but he wrote a book called Exchanging Apples, which he self-published. And his name is Larry Bell. And it's about what improvisational comedy taught him about management. So I'm not making this up. Improvisational comedy and improvisation as a concept is a really good one, especially for entrepreneurs, because what do entrepreneurs do? Or in my case, entrepreneurs, you're reacting.
Yeah.
You're thinking about how to change your product or how to get more money or how to whatever, but you're really doing it on a day-to-day basis, and you're reacting to the environment and what's going on. Because if you're not, then you're just going to stay. You're going to keep things as they are, and that's going to go flying beautifully down deep into the sea and get nowhere.
Yeah, because you're talking about the market's telling you what it wants. If you're not going to give the market what it wants, you're not going to get any sales of anything. Doesn't matter whether it's a product or service, and that's something that they well know. But I think that's another good way of giving perspective on what that is. If you can't be ready to change something, knowing that one little widget or that one little aspect needs to be tweaked, your competitor is going to come out with it, like you were warning, and all of a sudden your sales go through the floor. Right.
Or never take off worse.
Which is even better.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see. When I used to work for an angel investment firm, I was kind of like the investment manager. My job was to go out and go find potential deals. And I can't tell you how many people I used to come across and I would ask them what their concept was, and they would lay out the concept. Oh yeah, this is cool. This is what we're going to do. At the time, this was all the apps and tech stuff was going on. And I would ask them, so what happens if these projections don't work? Oh, no, they'll work. How can you be so sure? Well, because this worked. I'm like, okay. You think it worked like that out the gate? Do you honestly believe that they didn't face a few challenges before they even opened doors? Well, I'm sure they did, but it's probably not going to. I'm like, whoa, buddy, let me share something with you. If you're not ready to pivot in a moment's notice, this concept is going to die before it ever makes it out into the marketplace.
That's right. That's right. And they named it pivoting. We didn't have a name for it in those days.
Yeah, I know that came out like
it was just called, what are we going to do now? Because you know what? You keep the North Star in front of you, and the North Star was, come hell or high water, we were going to make a comedy network. Now that also applied to after the merger. Remember, we merged
Yeah.
with another channel that was completely different concept in comedy. And I didn't know if I'd have a job, but I did have a job. They said, they took me and they took the head programmer at the other channel and they threw us together and they said, okay, you guys make a channel out of this thing.
Oh,
And you can't call it Ha and you can't call it the Comedy Channel. I said, what do you mean? Hey, come on, the Comedy Channel is the greatest name ever for the Comedy Channel. He said, no, it would make it look like you guys won, So I was a little concerned and nervous because our concepts were different. Our cultures were different. This was the MTV guys, we're the HBO guys. But almost immediately I realized that those guys and us guys wanted the same thing. We wanted to make a network that celebrated comedy. And so we came to terms very quickly, figured out what we were going to do. And again, we were in the same boat. We had to keep finding new things to do, pivoting, as you call it, or just, turning up the good stuff and down the bad stuff, and start the whole thing over again, essentially.
When you're talking, you had like two completely different, you mentioned different cultures, obviously, different perspectives on something that was trying to deliver essentially the same product. What were some of those major things that you guys had to overcome?
I think it was mostly cultural, a little bit on concept. Our concept, we were going for young, edgy comedy, and their concept was, as they announced it, comedy for folks from 5 to 95. That's a pretty broad demographic. And they started with, these were the guys who were doing Nick at Night, which was a amazingly successful channel.
Yeah.
So what they had lying around that they could use quickly were sitcoms, old sitcoms.
Yeah.
So this was, they were, and believe me,
that's definitely a different
think
culture.
I'm denigrating old sitcoms, love old sitcoms, but that's not what we were trying to do.
No, the aims were completely different.
So when we came together, we had to really kind of navigate that difference, and we navigated it by sort of what we had in common, because they saw what was good about us and we saw what was good about them. And we got to cherry pick some programming at that point. They had Saturday Night Live reruns, which we wanted so desperately.
Oh, yeah.
It was a huge bidding war. Saturday Night Live had never been rerun. I mean, Lauren Michaels, who was producing it, he'd produce it. They'd show it once on NBC. They'd show it again in the summertime, and that was it. It went into the basement, and Lauren owned them. We went to Lauren and said, can we license those things? And Lauren said, okay. And almost immediately, the Ha guys said, hey, we want to license them. And boom, price went skyrocketing and we lost the bidding war. So the Ha guys got it. But the good news is suddenly we merged and we got it. Now it's part of our channel, and it kind of helped define us, because listen, the two greatest brands in comedy in the US in the last 30 years, SNL. Comedy Central and Saturday
SNL.
Night Live.
Yep.
I will posit. So that was important. And we worked a little bit with the talent at Saturday Night Live because we were showing their stuff, and that set us on a course that was closer to the young, edgy comedy that we were doing that persisted, essentially.
Yeah. So, and you guys finally got to that point when it came to the brand. How did you guys settle on that? How did you guys finally figure out that Comedy Central? I mean, honestly, it's a logical brand name to me. But having the pride of the comedy channel being merged with Ha. Again, I never got that brand. But how did you guys find? I know, right? I'm just like, okay, great. The Ha channel almost sounds anyway. But you guys eventually came to the brand, the Comedy Central. How did that come about?
Well, it's a great story, and it's a story I tell in my book.
Well, don't give it all away. Just give them the highlights.
No, I listen, I don't mind. I mean, I hope everybody reads the book, but I know they won't.
Everybody's going to be reading that book. That's for damn sure.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, so we got together And it was a big challenge. We had to launch soon. We didn't have a name. So we hired a company. This is New York City. So we hired a
Sure.
company that worked with names, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they came in and gave a presentation. And at the presentation, they said, okay, we got some names for you. And I skipped a step. Before the presentation, the other guy and me, his name was Michael, the head of programming, Michael Klinghoffer, the head of programming from the other channel. We talked a lot about what we wanted our comedy network to be. And we conveyed that to the company that was naming it. And one of the things we said was, yeah, we want to be the center of the comedy universe. That was as clear as we could make it, you know. So they come in and give the presentation and they suggested some names. And the names were like, oh, you're kidding me, right? One was Acme, one was Big, one was, you know. And then he said, yeah, because, you know, you guys, we said, why big? He said, you guys want to be big. You know, you want to be the center of the comedy universe. As you said, you want to be Comedy Central.
Oh, bing.
I said, what? You know, stop right there. And as I say in the book, the guy said, oh, you can't name it Comedy Central.
Why?
On the nose. You don't want to be on the nose.
On.
This is the television business. So he said, okay, all right. You know, we don't know. You're smarter than we are.
You're the guy. Yeah.
We got it. Okay. So we decided to do some testing on the names, and we had like 4 or 5 names that they had suggested or somebody else had suggested. And the research guy says, hey, you know what? You got to throw in another name or two, you know? So we said, okay, hey, why don't we throw in Comedy Central? You know, the name that guy didn't like.
Just for shits and giggles. Let's see what happens.
Just for shits and giggles. Exactly. Cut to the results come back. It's like 85% loved Comedy Central. The next highest one was 4. You know,
2 on the nose. Yeah,
and so
that's the point, buddy.
That's the name. We had a name, and that was a big moment for us. And you know what? Even then, I didn't, as much as I love the Comedy Channel. Even then, I thought, you know, that's a pretty good name for us, Comedy Central. You know,
being the center of the comedy universe, you gotta have that.
And we put that name on, and we wore it proudly, and it worked like a charm.
That was, if you think about it, it's cred and authority in a name and the brand name in and of itself. I mean, where else do you go?
Right.
For anything.
You got to remember, you're talking 30 years of establishing that. You know, you call your Comedy Central on day 2, people go, maybe, but it's aspirational, and that's, you know, that's a good note too.
Yeah.
You want your name to be aspirational. You want your tagline to be aspirational. You want to hear our first tagline?
What was it?
We're all gonna die. Watch Comedy Central.
Oh my gosh, I don't remember this one, but that's awesome.
It was awesome because you know, I called my kid brother Larry Bell. I called him and I said, "What do you think of that?" He says, "Oh, that's a star. That's great." You know. Then I mentioned it to my father, and he said, "You can't say that." And I thought, this is perfect, man. My kid brother loves it. My father isn't going to watch. He doesn't care. It works to keep him away, and perfect. And that was our first tagline.
Well, there has to be a story around that too, I'm sure, because we're all gonna.
How we came up with that? Yeah, there is. Hey, you know, I'm doing an audio book. Maybe I can read it on there.
I think you'll need to. You're gonna have to add that story in there. We're all gonna die. Just watch.
These are all great. Really, you know, when I sat down to write the book, I realized I had a lot of crazy, great stories about how this all came about, and how, you know, again, how difficult it was, but how much fun it was.
Would you? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Was it worth it? All the shit that you had to deal with, because there's a lot of stuff that we haven't talked about with regards to leaving Comedy Central, the drama that went on in the background, because there's a shit ton of drama, I'm sure. These things never get done without a lot of strife. These things never get done without a lot of friction. Was it worth it?
Yes. I mean, that's a short answer. Listen, it's great looking in my rearview mirror and seeing this giant comedy edifice still standing after 30 years, April 1st. 30-year anniversary of Comedy Central. It's just amazing. You know, again, Saturday Night Live, what are they up to? 40, 50, 60? I don't know.
Yep. And that's still going. And still going.
It's still going. And that's amazing too.
Yes, it is.
But there you go. You know?
Yeah, it's an amazing concept.
And I'm very proud of it. Now, I left Comedy Central after basically 8 years because I was fired.
What was that all about? What happened there?
Well, I was I was in programming and marketing, and I was working for the president of the channel. The president of the channel got fired by the board. And as everybody knows who's ever worked in a corporation, when your boss gets fired,
Chain behind them usually follows.
the room starts going like this,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what happened. The new guy came in and, true to form, fired all the old guys and gals pretty quickly. There's two approaches to taking over a company or taking over a job like that at the top. And one is to fire everybody because you want to bring your team in and to hell with everything else.
Yeah.
And two is, hey, let's see if there's anybody here worth working with, and let's see what kind of momentum we can get going.
Right.
And I've been in that situation. I've worked at other companies where I came in and there was an existing staff, and yeah, some of them went, but not until I learned whether they were good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think personally, I feel that that's the better way to do it. The person who came in and fired me didn't. It's that's show business, but it was, as you can imagine, a very personal and
oh, sure,
devastating moment for me. And I remember saying to myself, "The heck do you have to do to keep a job in this town?" Like, how about you invent the whole channel and work for 8 years to make it, put it on a path to success, to real big success. That didn't work to keep my job. So,
is there any cred left to you? Well, I shouldn't say left. Is there any cred still given to you for being a part of that whole thing?
I think over the years, I've been in touch with people who worked at Comedy Central. And I remember one instance in particular where one of the development execs there was a younger guy. I got to know him because I sent a friend of mine who was a writer who had a concept. He wanted to go to development. I found out who it was. And he said to me, the development exec said, when he was talking to me, he said, they should have a statue of you out front, in the lobby or something, because you invented this whole thing and people should know that. And I said, yeah, thanks. But I think to a certain extent, some people knew. And I think that writing the book, although it was not my intention to, wave my arms and say, hey, guess what? I was responsible for this, as have been hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands probably at this point over the years. Please don't let me, kid anybody that I did this all by myself.
Oh no,
I was the agitator, and I had a concept and I got it going, but it certainly, has been built by hundreds and hundreds.
Took a village.
And so, but the thing is, I wrote the book, and I think it's becoming, sort of more acknowledged that I started it. And then that it was not only coming up with the idea, but it was pushing for 8 years and finding ways to make it successful, and how difficult that was.
It's definitely an entrepreneurial book if I've ever heard of one. So that's amazing. Guys, we're going to take another short 30-second break. I had coffee. My tongue's already starting to tie. It's weird. We'll take another short 30-second break. When we come back, we'll see what's up in the future for Art. And we're back here, Java Chat, sitting here with Art Bell, the innovative creator of the Comedy Central station. For those of you that are really young, it's a huge deal. I don't care how you look at it. It'd be the same as somebody creating Amazon Prime today, because at the time it was unheard of, unthought of, and was definitely an innovation in broadcasting, dealing with all the different things that he had to deal with back then. It wasn't all under one roof, guys. You couldn't watch it on your phone. This is the reality of it. And the reason I say this is because I've noticed a lot of our listeners are in their early 20s to 30s. You show them a rotary dial phone and they look at it like, what is it? And you and I are sitting there going, yeah, you have no idea the pain of missing a 9.
That's funny.
Nobody out of our generation knows that pain. So Art's got a book out, and these are memoirs, and it kind of, not everybody understands what memoirs are. You want to explain how that book is written?
Yeah, memoir is the story I am telling from my point of view, based on my recollection and memory of what happened. I did very little research. for the book. It's not a history. It's not an autobiography. It's really stories and events as I recall them, including dialogue. And the good news is I remembered a lot of stuff, including
awesome.
dialogue.
Yeah, dialogue's a big deal.
Well, there's a lot of dialogue in the book because there were a lot of conversations, some of them incredibly funny, and some of them not so funny. But I remember so much of that. And it was such an explosively creative time that I wanted to capture that dynamic, and I wanted to capture the people and really do them justice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the book. The book is Constant Comedy, by the way.
Nice.
There it is. How I started Comedy Central and lost my sense of humor. And
that tagline really, I mean, how I lost my sense of humor. When I first looked at that, I was like, oh my gosh, this man's been through some shit. Yeah, I mean, it has to be. And of course, sure, so through some of the descriptions and small things that I've written in reviews, you did go through some shit. I mean, even inside the 8 years that you were there, there's still that, as we've been talking through the whole time. So does it start before Comedy Central, or does it start in, or where do you actually start the stories?
It's primarily about Comedy Central.
Okay.
And it starts basically there. However, I do weave some stories of my childhood and other things that are relevant. It's not just, hey, I got a story to tell you. I mean, relevant stories to the story of Comedy Central that I'm telling, because even as a kid, I loved comedy. I wrote satire in high school. I performed in college. So I get some of those in bits and pieces. But primarily, it's a linear story of what happened from the time I pitched the channel to the time I got fired. Again, it's very personal.
Yeah.
When you write a memoir, you find out you have to turn yourself inside out, because writing a memoir and not talking about how you really feel, nobody cares.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not worth doing that.
Yeah.
And I took some classes at a writing institute, Sarah Lawrence Writing Institute, and learned how to write memoir. And I learned just from listening to the other people, these people were talking about their childhood as difficult or whatever they were talking about, really personal things that they hadn't shared with anybody else. But that's what you end up writing about in a memoir, personal things you didn't share about anyone else with anyone else. And I remember I had my wife, as you can imagine, read the book as I was writing it. And she said, man, do you really want to say that? You don't sound like, a strong, powerful executive in this section. I said, I wasn't. I was scared, and I want to say I was scared, or I was nervous, or I was whatever I was, because that's what a memoir is. Yeah. So I will say this too. If anybody really wants to know what goes on inside the television business, or more broadly inside a corporation, here it is, unfiltered, and it's got some parts of it that people have really noted. One was the whole section where I got fired.
Yeah.
Because people don't write about that and how they felt and how it happens and what people say and how you recover and everything. So, and that's the last couple of chapters of the book. It's worth reading if you're interested in working in the entertainment business, and if you're ever going to end up working in a corporation.
I would almost venture to say too, that because again, you mentioned the entrepreneur portion of it. Anybody who's thinking about getting into a business, from some of the things that we've just discussed, I can already hear there's probably some good nuggets in the book as well. So I'm going to personally just go ahead and say, hey, if you're an entrepreneur, you're interested in business, period, here's a very, very large view by someone's personal experience. Memoirs are a good way to let out the vulnerability and the authenticity that people look for. And if you actually can nail that, which is not easy, I haven't tried. I did publish a book, but it was more just, informational. If you really want to be vulnerable, go read a memoir, any of the memoirs that are, I can't remember what her name was, but there was one that was just a series of letters. And holy cow, you want to talk about dumping your heart out on the table. A memoir is a good way to do it. So again, for anybody that's listening, What other things are you working on? Are you working on anything else besides the book, or are you retired now, or what do you do?
Well, yes, I'm not working in business, but as I said, to call this retirement is not accurate. Um,
you, you traded one job for another.
yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, I love writing. I found out,
That's cool.
actually, it's not like a huge discovery, but it's the first time I've been writing prose, sort of
Nice.
way I'm writing it. And I'm writing fiction now, working on, I had some short stories
Cool.
published, and I'm really enjoying that. And I'm working on a longer piece, whether it becomes a novel or not, we'll see.
Yeah.
Great fun. And I'm also, with regards to the book, I've been asked to speak in a lot of places, and
Awesome.
that's been great fun.
Awesome.
Especially when I speak to younger people in graduate classes, business school classes, film classes,
Yes.
I mean, that's very rewarding for me.
Sure.
And in addition, I am doing a podcast.
Oh, excellent.
I am doing a podcast with Vinny Favale, who's in the book, who was with me when we launched comedy and left around the same time as I did. He ended up at CBS becoming a big development exec there. One of the interesting things is all the people who started a comedy channel, they were kids then.
Yeah.
Went on to brilliant careers in the entertainment business. And that's some
hear.
of the fun. Anyway, so that's what we're doing with this podcast. It's called The Constant Comedy Podcast.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Art Bell and Vinny Favale. And Vinny is a very funny guy. I'm relatively funny, but he's very funny. And so our conversations are really fun. And we're talking to people, we talked the other day to a woman who worked at comedy. We were her first job in television.
Really?
She went on to become the head of Fox Television and also the head of Paramount Pictures. Now this,
what?
Yeah, no kidding. Her name is Gail Berman. We launched a lot of people into the business who became, very, very, very powerful, famous people in the business. So it's a lot of fun talking to them, and, getting someone like that to kind of reminisce and talk about, oh man, I couldn't believe I didn't know anything, and this is what I did. But that was the beauty of the beginning of Comedy Channel and Comedy Central was a bunch of us who didn't know how to make a comedy channel, but we were going to kill ourselves trying.
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
And
so the podcast that comes out April 1st.
Okay.
And it's available, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, the usual suspects.
I like how you said that, the usual suspects.
and there's more. I am working on the audiobook. Hopefully that'll be up in the summer. Yeah. And I'm reading it myself.
Awesome. Even better. That's
it's really fun.
Well, I'll definitely be ordering a copy of that too, because I love Audibles. Audibles are my big thing for when I go and walk and stuff like that. So I'll definitely get a copy of that. Everybody likes a bit of advice here and there from people that have been there, done that. What would you say to somebody who's aspiring to create something, whether that's just a simple product or whether they're looking to create a new channel? What would you suggest to them? What would be a piece of advice that you think would be of value?
Well, there's kind of a motto I live by, or I tried to live by, which is be bold and take chances. And I think that lots of people are out there with a lot of talent and great ideas, even if they're working at a corporation, especially if they're working at a corporation. What corporations are bad at? Starting new businesses. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And in fact, if you show up in your corporation the way I showed up in mine, and it took a lot, you can convince them to start your business inside their corporation. And that can be a fantastic experience. Saves you the trouble of looking for money, saves you the trouble of finding lawyers, finance people, and, tech people and all the other things. Yeah. The upside isn't as big that quickly, but, as I always point out, I went on to have a really fun, great career based on what I did. And people say, oh, well, you didn't own any of comedy. All right. I realize that didn't happen, but no regrets.
It's the best when somebody can take a step out and just say, hey, let's do it. People can find you online. I assume you have a website.
I do. It's artbellwriter.com.
Artbellwriter.com.
Give some more information about my book, where to buy it, the podcasts, And also there's some writing that I've done that I just put up there on my blog. There's an interview with myself, which people have said is very funny. And
There's an interview of you with you. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I interview myself.
That's going to be interesting. I'm going to go listen to that for sure.
And yeah, so I, drop by and read some of the stories because some of them are funny.
Cool.
And
Sounds good.
They're not anywhere else. They're not published anywhere else. So.
Okay. And then you're also on social. I know you're on LinkedIn. I sent you a request. Where else are you?
LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, but it's more Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for me.
Figured as much. Awesome. I think that's it, my friend. There's the most, for those of you that are looking for that book, make sure you go over to artbellwriter.com and get yourself a copy. I'm venturing to think that there's a lot of good information in there for anybody. I'm not just thinking of entrepreneurs. I'm thinking of even business pros. There's got to be stuff in there for them too.
Yep. And you can get it at Amazon too, by the way. And
there you go.
Online. You
hey, everybody loves Amazon.
Buy the hardcover, download it, whatever you like. And at bookstores, it's out there.
I really don't want to stop this one, but we've kind of come to the end of our time. Damn it. And I've also run out of coffee, so I need to go get another cup. Thanks so much, Art, for coming on here and sharing your story, sharing your insights.
It's been my pleasure. My pleasure, Mike.
It's been, I love having guests like you because there's so much more to talk about. So we're probably going to be asking you back, hopefully come talk a little bit more about the entrepreneur differences and dig into that stuff. That'd be fun.
I'd like that.
For those of you that are watching on YouTube, don't forget, over there's a subscribe button. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you do, and then hit that bell that's next to it, because that tells you when we get another amazing guest like Art and when we post it. So don't miss out. If you're listening to us on any of the platforms, podcast platforms that we're on, I think we're on 13 or something like that. Subscribe, download, share a review, do something, don't just sit there and be a bump on a log, as they used to say. If there's an old saying for you, right? That's an old one. Gave away my age. If you're listening to us on anchor.fm, that is our home platform. We'd love some support there too. Big one though, not so much just for yourself. You've heard this, you've got to know somebody that came across your mind during this podcast that you said, oh hell, they have to listen to this. This would be good for so-and-so. I need to give this to, go share it. Send it to them. Help get this out there. This is information that somebody out there can use. It's good. A nice share just shows your love for somebody else. We love all of you. We thank you for making the time and taking the time to stop by and listen to us. Sometimes that saying gets me a little emotional because really, in the scheme of things, we're not a big deal. We love the fact that any of you think we are. So stay up, stay safe, stay healthy, and live. For myself, Coffee with Mike and Art Bell. Ciao for now.
For more information on Java Chat, visit www.javachatpodcast.com. You've been listening to Coffee with Mike on Java Chat. Tune in weekly to this podcast for the next episode. You can also download or subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. A production of Oasis Media Group, LLC. Located in Las Vegas, Nevada. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved.